Good afternoon. I'm Galanne Deressa from the UNFPA Asia and the Pacific Regional Office. We're here today for the next in the series of the What's Changed ICPD 25 conversations. With us, we have Dr. Juan Antonio Perez III, the Undersecretary of Population and Development and Executive Director of the Philippines Commission on Population and Development. We are also joined by Mr. Bjorn Andersson, the Regional Director of the UNFPA Asia and the Pacific Regional Office. Dr. GP,
yes.
The first question for you. The Philippines Population Commission has just celebrated your 50th anniversary. It coincides with UNFPA's 50th anniversary. I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit about reflections on Dr. Rafael Salas, UNFPA's founding executive director, the perspective that he had and the vision that he had, the hopes he had for Philippines in terms of population, and also perhaps for UNFPA's global work on population.
Well, Mr. Rafael Salas was Executive Secretary of the President of the Philippines at the time, and around 7 months before he left, he drafted an order that created the Commission on Population. And he had it signed by the President. And by July, when it was signed in February, in July, he went to New York to join the United Nations and be the first executive director. Historically, Mr. Salas was the executive secretary who was in charge of the food program in the country. He ran the program so well that the Philippines became self-sufficient during his time. But when he was working on the food program, he realized that population had a lot to do with the food program, the fact that a growing population such as we had in the country would affect the resources available. So it was an easy shift for him to go from being executive secretary and the food jar, looking at population, to join the UNFPA. I think his experience there in government made him very ready for his work in the UNFPA, which started the same year that we had our 50th year. And we were able to set up a program on family planning with his guidance initially, and it became a family planning program focused on population. His vision basically was he wanted results, and the same thing as he did with the food program. He wanted a program that would have results, and he really empowered his people to run the program, and with little guidance from him, unless they made a mistake. Then he would be a tough person to deal with. But he was that kind of a manager. He would empower people, make sure things could get done. And I think that's a good legacy he left us in the Philippines.
Bjorn, you're from Sweden, which is a very different context from the Philippines. And you were a young staff member when the ICPD Programme of Action that was being developed, formulated, and adopted in Cairo, which was presided over by Dr. Nafis Sadiq, who was the then executive director of UNFPA. Could you tell us a little bit about your experiences and what it was like as the preparations for the ICPD were underway? And how did the process unfold in terms of getting 179 governments to come to agreement? And what was it like afterwards? What was the process of taking forward this huge program of action that was very important?
You know, celebrating ICPD 25 really brings back a lot of memories for me. And yes, you mentioned that Sweden and the Philippines perhaps are very different in many ways. But when it comes to ICPD issues or sexual and reproductive health and reproductive rights, I think regardless whether you are in Europe, in Asia or in Africa, the nature of the issues, the nature of questions raised by young people, it's very much the same. But I came in to work. I started to work at the UN in 1991, and the first two major assignments was that I was involved in preparing for the ICPD meeting or the conference. And one was to organize an expert group meeting on population development and the environment. And the other one was on population dynamics and structures. And the questions we discussed at that time are very much the same today, with one major shift which happened in Cairo, and that's you focus, rather than on the numbers, you focus on the individual. And also, placing gender equality, women's empowerment, women's rights in the center of the discussion. But working also, what worked at that time and what made Cairo so significant and so successful was the partnerships and the building of a consensus around the importance to shift from, again, looking at the macro perspective to more the micro perspective. And we succeeded. So we got, sexual and reproductive health and reproductive rights in the center. We talked about the importance of research, of working in partnerships, that all countries in the world contribute to make this happen. So after the conference itself, it was great celebrations. But as it is after big conferences, it also has its own self-reflection, if you like. And I remember being back in Sweden later on in the 90s, that there was some discussion around all the World Conference of the 90s. And at that time, there were critical voices. We didn't really achieve what we wanted to achieve. But I think what these past 25 years what they have shown us, it's really that Cairo matters. And that even today, referring to ICPD 25, and referring to ICPD, it's really in the center of what we do. So it shows that member states in the 1990s were very future-looking and very innovative in crafting such a strong document.
Dr. GP, Bjorn mentioned partnerships. Your work has primarily been in the Philippines, but you have also participated in many of the intergovernmental reviews and meetings related to ICPD, particularly at the regional and global levels. I wonder if you could share with us a little bit about how you see that shift, how you see a shift in terms of the discussions that have happened, perhaps over the past 10 to 15 years in relation to ICPD at the regional level, and how you see the value of the regional role in terms of discussing and reviewing ICPD.
Well, I've noted that for the last, let's say, 2 decades, I've been more involved with, first initially with NGOs working on reproductive health before I went back to government. And I've noted that governments continue to be committed to the principles of ICPD in a general way, but some people outside of government are saying that we need to go further. We need to expand the agenda also to cover other sectors that are not being covered. And I see that as a dialogue between governments and NGOs that should happen. It's happened in the Philippines, and that dialogue led to our responsible parenthood reproductive health law. So there are advantages when within countries you talk to each other and try to find a solution, even if sometimes a sector like the religious group might not want what you're doing, but eventually you come to some agreement. Internationally, the ground for Programme of Action may have been a bit rocky in the last decade because of divergences of some opinions, and maybe some people feel that we can't be talking like Cairo again because things have changed. And I recall that when Secretary Salas went to the Philippines, he gave a speech before some students, and he said, we should think beyond ideologies, and he was right in a way that he said, a government can become socialist or capitalist, you can turn center, left or right, but in the end, we all need to feed our people, to educate them, and to, in the end, employ them. which is the essence of the population program. And I think countries should go back to that essence, that doesn't matter actually whether one's ideology or religion is given prominence. It's really that we need to make things happen for our people and make development part of our population program, and again, put people at the center of development rather than other issues. And I think eventually we'll come back to that consensus.
Bjorn, ICPD is meant to be a shared agenda with UNFPA as its steward. From a regional perspective of UNFPA, but perhaps even a global perspective, what do you see as the challenges in terms of forging the kinds of partnerships that are necessary to take it forward among UN agencies, but also beyond, particularly in the context of Agenda 2030?
Thanks, Galanne. No, I just wanted to say what you're saying, Dr. GP, about putting people in the center for development. That's really the essence of ICPD and the Programme of Action. And I think that's what we need, actually, that's where we need to remind ourselves over and over again, that, you know, it is about people, it's about individual men and women, boys and girls, their opportunities, their needs, their rights to be able to establish and create a good life for themselves. And as UN agencies or governments, we are there to facilitate and help that happen. But I think with the Cairo Programme of Action, it's such a broad development agenda that it really reflects. And when it comes to demography, population census, data, research, I see such a great interest, especially for UNFPA's knowledge and capacity to provide support to governments and to engage in a dialogue with the civil society on what's happening. I think the challenges with the Programme of Action, it's when you start talking about sexual health or reproductive health and rights, when it really relates to your own individual. And that's why we have to be very, think very strategically and think very, try to understand with whom you're speaking, to understand where they're coming from, and to provide evidence. And I think the evidence of investing in reproductive health, whether it's for economic purposes or the improvement of the life of a mother, that's strong arguments. And when you do that, and when you do it in the right way, I think these past 25 years have really told us that that's when you can see a difference in countries and in societies. And, changing people's views on harmful practices, for example, gender-based violence or female genital mutilation wherever it happens in the world, it's something that takes time, and you need to work at the local level with the community, because it is really people's beliefs and views that you need to touch. And if you can do that, if you can reach out to the heart of people, people will change.
So this year we're heading towards the Nairobi summit, which will take place in November 2019. Are there any last reflections or thoughts that you would like to share with our audience in terms of the path towards Nairobi, but also the road to the SDGs and achievement of Agenda 2030?
Well, the way I see it, for the Asia-Pacific region in particular, we have such great diversity. We have great inequalities that we still see. But what unites us all is that we are all on the road to development. And different countries are at different, different kilometer posts along that road. We do not have to be all. We cannot be all on the same in one united marching forward. Countries will be left behind. Countries will be going ahead. So what I think we need to do is understand what those differences are and look for ways to help one another in a way of solidarity, helping one another, and finding a way for the entire region to eventually move forward. And that means agreeing on some things that could serve as goalposts for us. And then beyond that, to check again how far or how near we are from each goalpost and find a way to help each other, because it's people who are marching on the road of development that need to get there. And I think that's a laudable goal for us as we go to Agenda 2030. And Nairobi can be a goalpost for all of us, but understanding that we're all at different levels.
I agree with you again, Dr. GP. It's to listen to partners, to listen to governments, and listen to the civil society, and listen to the evidence that generates from academia or in research and what is happening in countries. And I think what is very different from 25 years ago is really the diversity of countries, not just between the regions, but within regions as well. And we need to be able to understand what's happening in societies, how people are thinking, and building on the positive trends and the positive changes which take place, and tailor our support to that new environment in which we are operating. But I also think there are many, many new emerging issues, if you like. If you look to this region, for example, today we are talking about population aging in almost every country in the region, which we didn't do in the same way 25 years ago. We have much more data, we have much more information around whether maternal health or around adolescence, pregnancy, whatever it might be. And we need to use this data in order to sort of have a good conversation with partners. And I think that's really what was a success in 1994, was really that you built on one another's views and positions and knowledge, and that we need to keep on doing also for the Nairobi summit. And that's how we will achieve success and to move on. The Cairo Programme of Action doesn't have to be rewritten in any way. It's strong language, it's good language that fits into countries, the needs of countries and national plans. But we just need to be more take on that listening mode, especially from the United Nations or UNFPA, so that we can tailor-make the support which is needed.
Yeah, you're right, Bjorn. Just last November, the countries of the Asia-Pacific said POA is still important, Cairo is still important, and we need to, continue our progress from that starting point and not move back from it.
Thank you very much for sharing your reflections on how far we've come and how we might think about moving forward towards Nairobi and achievement of Agenda 2030.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you, Galanne.